My wife mocked me for being poor, humiliated me in front of her friends, treated me like I was nothing more than a pathetic loser who couldn't provide for his family. She spent 5 years of our marriage telling everyone who would listen that she had married beneath herself, that I was a failure, a disappointment. She even had the audacity to start an affair with her boss, flaunting it right in my face, because she thought I was too weak and too broke to do anything about it. But on the day of our divorce hearing, when she thought she was going to walk away with half of nothing, I revealed that I was worth $47 million. Can you guess what happened next? Can you imagine the look on her face when she realized she had just thrown away the biggest fortune she would ever see? Well, buckle up, because this story is going to take you on a ride you won't believe.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It will change your day.
Let me start from the beginning, and I mean the very beginning, because you need to understand how deep this deception went and why I chose to live this lie for so long. My name is David Mitchell, and I'm what you might call a self-made millionaire, though nobody in my personal life knew that for the longest time. I made my fortune in cryptocurrency and tech investments, starting when I was just 22 years old, fresh out of college with a computer science degree and a burning desire to prove myself. But here's the thing that most people don't understand about sudden wealth, especially when you're young. It changes how people see you, and not always in good ways. I learned this lesson the hard way during my early 20s. I had a girlfriend back then, Sarah, who I thought loved me for who I was. We'd been together since college, struggling together, eating ramen noodles, and dreaming about our future. But the moment my first big investment paid off and I bought a nice car, suddenly all her friends started paying attention to me. Sarah changed too. She became possessive, materialistic, and frankly, kind of shallow. She started talking about marriage not because she loved me, but because she loved my bank account. That relationship ended badly, and I made myself a promise. The next woman I fell in love with would have to love me for who I was, not what I had. So, I created David Mitchell, the struggling graphic designer. I rented a modest apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, bought a beat-up Honda Civic, and even took on a few real graphic design clients to make the story believable. Meanwhile, my real investments were managed through a series of LLCs and trusts that I'd set up with my lawyer and accountant. The beauty of this arrangement was that I could live this modest lifestyle while my money continued to grow in the background.
And that's how I met Rebecca. Rebecca Williams was a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized company downtown. She was beautiful, ambitious, and seemed to have this incredible zest for life that I found absolutely captivating. I met her at a coffee shop where I was working on what she thought was a freelance project, but was actually just me researching my next investment opportunity. She struck up a conversation about the laptop I was using, an older MacBook that I'd deliberately chosen to maintain my cover, and we ended up talking for 3 hours. What I loved about Rebecca in those early days was how genuine she seemed. She talked about her dreams of starting her own marketing firm someday, about wanting to travel the world, about her close relationship with her family. She wasn't flashy or materialistic. She drove a practical sedan, lived in a nice but modest apartment, and seemed to value experiences over possessions. When I told her I was a freelance graphic designer struggling to build my client base, she didn't judge me. In fact, she seemed excited about the possibility of us growing our careers together. We dated for 8 months before I proposed, and those were honestly some of the happiest months of my life. Rebecca was supportive, loving, and funny. She would bring me coffee when I was working late on what she thought were client projects. She would suggest ways to market my services and even offered to help me design a website. She seemed genuinely invested in my success, even when that success appeared to be modest at best. But here's where I need to pause and ask you something. Was I wrong to deceive her from the beginning? I mean, I had good reasons, right? I'd been burned before, and I wanted to make sure she loved me for me. But looking back now, I wonder if I was being unfair. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have told the truth from day one and risked having someone love your bank account instead of your heart? Or would you have done what I did and created this elaborate test of their character? The proposal was simple but meaningful. I took her to the same coffee shop where we'd met and got down on one knee right there at our usual table. The ring wasn't enormous. I'd deliberately chosen something beautiful but modest to stay in character. But she cried tears of joy and said yes immediately. She kept saying how she didn't care if we didn't have much money, that we would build our life together, and that she couldn't wait to be my wife. I believed her completely, and I was already planning how and when I would reveal the truth about my financial situation.
I thought maybe I'd tell her on our wedding night or during our honeymoon. I imagined how thrilled she would be to discover that all her dreams of travel and starting her own business could become reality immediately. I pictured us laughing about the deception, with her playfully hitting my arm and calling me crazy for putting us both through unnecessary stress about money. I had it all planned out in my head, this beautiful moment of revelation that would kick off our happily ever after. Our wedding was lovely, but modest, exactly what you'd expect from a struggling graphic designer and a marketing coordinator. We had it at a local community center, and Rebecca's aunt made the cake. Rebecca looked absolutely stunning in a dress she'd found on sale, and I felt like the luckiest man alive. Both our families were there, and everyone kept talking about how clearly in love we were, how perfect we seemed together. Rebecca's maid of honor gave a speech about how she'd never seen Rebecca happier, and how she could tell that Rebecca had found her soulmate. For our honeymoon, I told Rebecca I'd managed to save up enough for a week in Cabo, which was technically true, but also laughably understated given my actual financial situation. I was planning to upgrade us to a suite once we got there, and then use that as my moment to come clean. I had this whole romantic scenario planned out where I'd reveal everything on the beach at sunset, and we'd spend the rest of our honeymoon planning our amazing future together. But life, as you probably know, rarely goes according to plan. 3 days before we were supposed to leave for Mexico, Rebecca's father had a heart attack. Not life-threatening, thank God, but serious enough that she wanted to postpone the honeymoon to be close to family. I was disappointed about my planned revelation, but of course I understood completely. Family comes first, and I admired her for prioritizing her father's health over our vacation. So we postponed the honeymoon and spent our first week as newlyweds visiting her dad in the hospital and helping her mom manage everything at home. I kept thinking I'd find the right moment to tell her about the money, but it never seemed appropriate. How do you drop that kind of bombshell when your wife is worried sick about her father? Her dad recovered well, thankfully, but by then we were settled into married life, and I kept finding reasons to delay the conversation. We were happy. We weren't struggling financially in any real way because I was carefully managing our expenses from my hidden accounts, and I kept telling myself I'd find the perfect moment soon.
But perfect moments, I learned, are often just excuses for procrastination. The first year of our marriage was genuinely wonderful. Rebecca was the partner I'd always dreamed of having. She was supportive of my work, understanding when I had to put in long hours on what she thought were demanding client projects, and always ready with encouragement when I seemed frustrated. She had no idea that my frustrations were actually about managing my investment portfolio and looking for new opportunities, not about dealing with difficult graphic design clients. We fell into comfortable routines. Rebecca would leave for her office job every morning, and I'd spend my days either working on actual graphic design projects to maintain my cover, or more often, managing my investments from home. I was good at it, too. That first year of marriage, my portfolio grew by another $6 million. But Rebecca had no idea. As far as she knew, we were a young couple just starting out, carefully budgeting and saving for our future. But somewhere during that second year, things started to change. It began subtly. Rebecca started making little comments about money that I hadn't noticed before.
She'd see her coworkers buying new clothes or talking about vacations, and she'd come home with this slightly wistful expression. She started suggesting that maybe I should look for a more stable job, something with benefits and a steady paycheck, instead of trying to make it as a freelancer. At first, I thought she was just being practical and looking out for our future. But then the comments became more pointed. She started comparing our lifestyle to her friends and family members who were doing better financially. Her sister had married a lawyer and they just bought a house in a great neighborhood. Her college roommate's husband was in sales, and they were taking cruises twice a year. Rebecca began to make subtle digs about how everyone else seemed to be moving forward, while we were stuck in the same small apartment, driving the same old cars. Now, let me pause here and ask you something. How long would you have let this go on? I was starting to feel defensive about my fake financial situation, which was absurd because I could have solved all our perceived problems with a single phone call to my investment manager. But I'd been living this lie for so long, and I kept thinking Rebecca would remember what she'd said during our engagement about not caring if we didn't have much money. I kept waiting for her to return to the woman who said we'd build our life together regardless of our bank account balance.
Instead, her attitude got worse. By the third year of our marriage, Rebecca had become someone I barely recognized. The sweet, supportive woman I'd fallen in love with had been replaced by someone who seemed constantly frustrated with our life. She started making comments about my work ethic, suggesting that if I really applied myself, I could be making more money. She'd point out successful people we knew and ask why I couldn't be more like them. The worst part was that she started doing this in front of other people. I'll never forget this one dinner party at her sister's house. Rebecca's brother-in-law, the lawyer I mentioned, was talking about some big case he'd won, and Rebecca chimed in with, "That's so impressive. I wish David had that kind of ambition. He's content just scraping by with his little design projects." She said it with this laugh, like it was supposed to be a joke, but everyone could tell she was serious. I felt humiliated, sitting there knowing I was worth more than everyone at that table combined, but unable to defend myself without blowing my cover. That night, I almost told her everything. We had a huge fight when we got home. I asked her why she felt the need to embarrass me in front of her family, and she said she wasn't embarrassing me, she was just being honest about our situation. She said she was tired of pretending everything was fine when we were clearly falling behind everyone else our age. She actually used the phrase falling behind, like life was some kind of race that we were losing. I came so close to ending the charade that night. I had my phone in my hand, ready to show her my investment account balances. But then she started crying and apologizing, saying she was just stressed about money and worried about our future. She said she loved me and didn't want to pressure me, but she was scared we'd never be able to afford kids or a house or any of the things she dreamed about. She seemed so genuinely upset that I put my phone away and held her instead, promising her that everything would work out. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have come clean and ended the test? Or would you have given her more time to show her true colors? I chose to wait, and looking back now, I think that was the moment I should have known where this was all heading.
The fourth year was when Rebecca's behavior became truly unbearable. The subtle digs became open criticism. She started telling people outright that I was a disappointment, that she'd expected more from me, that she was tired of carrying the financial burden in our relationship. This last part was particularly galling because I'd been secretly supplementing our income the entire time to make sure she could live comfortably on her salary alone. She had no idea that the reason we never seemed to struggle, despite her claims about my inadequate income, was because I was quietly paying for everything behind the scenes. But the absolute worst part was how she started treating me at home. She'd come home from work in a bad mood and take it out on me. She'd make comments about how embarrassing it was to be married to someone with no ambition. She started refusing to go to social events where she might have to explain what I did for work. She even started hinting that maybe we'd made a mistake getting married so young, before we really knew who we were going to become. The breaking point came during our 4th anniversary dinner.
I'd made reservations at a nice restaurant, nothing too fancy, but somewhere special to celebrate. Rebecca spent the entire meal talking about her coworker whose husband had just gotten a big promotion. She went on and on about their new house, their vacation to Europe, their plans to start a family now that they were financially secure. Then she looked at me across the table and said, "Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd married someone with real goals." I sat there, stunned. This was the woman I'd loved enough to marry, the woman I'd been protecting from the truth because I wanted to make sure she loved me for who I was. And she was sitting there telling me she wished she'd married someone else, someone with more money. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to reveal my wealth and save our marriage. Instead, I was going to let Rebecca show me exactly who she really was. And then I was going to make sure she faced the consequences of her choices. From that point on, I started documenting everything. I began recording our conversations when she would go on her rants about money and my failures as a husband. I started keeping detailed notes about the cruel things she said, the time she humiliated me in public, the way she treated me like I was some kind of burden she was stuck with.
I also started being more strategic about our finances, making sure that legally she would have no claim to any of my hidden assets when this all came to an end. You might be wondering why I didn't just divorce her then and there. Why put myself through months more of abuse? Here's the thing. I needed to be absolutely certain about who Rebecca really was. Part of me kept hoping she'd remember the woman she used to be, the woman who said money didn't matter. I gave her chance after chance to prove that her love was stronger than her greed. She failed every single test. The 5th year of our marriage was a nightmare. Rebecca became openly contemptuous of me. She started staying out late after work, and I strongly suspected she was seeing someone else. She'd come home and compare me unfavorably to other men, talking about how successful they were, how well they provided for their families, how proud their wives were of them. She made it clear that she was ashamed to be married to me. The final straw came when she brought her affair partner to a party at her company. I wasn't invited, of course, because she was embarrassed to introduce me to her coworkers. But I found out about it from her sister, who was horrified that Rebecca was openly cheating on me. When I confronted Rebecca about it, she didn't even deny it. She said that Marcus, her boss, was everything I wasn't: successful, ambitious, generous. She said she was tired of being married to a loser and that she deserved better. That's when I told her I wanted a divorce. Rebecca's reaction was not what I expected. Instead of being upset or trying to save our marriage, she seemed relieved. She said she'd been wanting to ask for a divorce herself, but hadn't wanted to hurt my feelings. She actually said she felt sorry for me and didn't want to damage my self-esteem any further by leaving me. The condescension was unbelievable. But here's where it gets interesting. When we started discussing the divorce terms, Rebecca suddenly became very concerned about making sure she got her fair share of our assets. This was hilarious to me because, as far as she knew, we had almost nothing. Our apartment was rented, our cars were old and paid off, and she thought my income was barely enough to support one person, let alone two. But somehow, she'd convinced herself that I must be hiding money from her. She hired a lawyer, a friend of Marcus's, who started making demands that were completely unreasonable given our supposed financial situation. They wanted half of everything, plus alimony, plus a portion of what they claimed was my potential future earnings as a graphic designer.
They even demanded that I provide 5 years of financial records to prove I wasn't hiding assets. The irony was delicious.
Now, here's where I need to ask you another question. What would you have done at this point? Would you have just given her whatever she wanted to make the divorce quick and easy? Or would you have done what I did and decided to teach her a lesson she'd never forget? I chose option 2. I hired the best divorce attorney in the city, a woman named Catherine Reeves, who had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in court. When Catherine asked me about our financial situation during our first meeting, I told her everything. I showed her my real bank statements, my investment portfolios, my business interests, everything that Rebecca had no idea about. Catherine's eyes got wider and wider as I explained the situation. "Let me get this straight," Catherine said. "Your wife has been emotionally abusing you for years because she thinks you're poor, she's been having an affair, and now she wants to divorce you to be with her wealthy boss, but she still wants half of what she thinks are your non-existent assets?" "That's exactly right," I confirmed. Catherine smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "This is going to be fun." We developed a strategy that was absolutely brilliant. We would let Rebecca and her lawyer continue to believe that I was the struggling graphic designer she thought I was. We wouldn't reveal any of my true assets until we were in court, where everything would be on the record, and she couldn't back out of the proceedings. Catherine would present evidence of Rebecca's affair, her emotional abuse, and her mercenary motives, and then, at the perfect moment, we'd drop the bombshell about my real net worth. The months leading up to the court date were surreal. Rebecca moved out of our apartment and in with Marcus, but she kept calling me to discuss divorce settlement details. She'd talk about how she didn't want to be greedy, but she felt entitled to compensation for the years she'd wasted with me. She'd remind me of all the sacrifices she'd made, being married to someone with such limited prospects. The lack of self-awareness was staggering. During one of these phone calls, she actually had the audacity to say that she hoped we could remain friends after the divorce. She said she still cared about me and wanted me to find happiness, preferably with someone who had more realistic expectations than she did. She suggested that I might be better suited to someone who was less ambitious and wouldn't mind being married to a man with such modest goals.
I just listened and took notes. Every cruel word, every casual insult, every demonstration of her complete lack of respect or love for the man she'd promised to honor and cherish. It was all going to be evidence in court. Catherine was brilliant during the discovery phase. She managed to get Rebecca's team to put all of their demands in writing, including a statement from Rebecca herself about why she deserved a substantial settlement despite our apparently limited assets. Rebecca actually wrote that she'd sacrificed her own career advancement to support my unsuccessful business endeavors and that she deserved compensation for the opportunity costs of being married to an underachiever. Meanwhile, Catherine was quietly preparing our nuclear option. She'd gathered all the documentation of my real assets, including statements showing that my net worth had grown to $47 million by the time we filed for divorce. She had records of all the times I'd secretly supplemented our income to maintain our comfortable lifestyle. She had evidence that Rebecca had been living far better than she would have been able to on her salary alone, all because of my hidden contributions. The day of our court hearing arrived, and I had never been more nervous or more excited about anything in my life. Rebecca showed up looking confident and polished, with Marcus there for moral support. She'd clearly dressed to impress the judge, wearing an expensive-looking outfit that I suspected Marcus had bought for her. Her lawyers seemed equally confident, probably expecting this to be a quick proceeding with minimal assets to divide. I, on the other hand, dressed exactly like the struggling graphic designer Rebecca thought I was. Khakis, a button-down shirt from Target, and the same watch I'd been wearing since college. I wanted to maintain the illusion right up until the moment of truth. Catherine, however, looked like she was ready for war. The proceedings started normally. Rebecca's lawyer presented their case first, painting me as a deadbeat husband who'd failed to provide adequately for his wife. He talked about my lack of ambition and limited earning potential, using almost the exact same phrases Rebecca had been using to describe me for years. He argued that Rebecca deserved a substantial settlement because she'd been the primary breadwinner and had supported me through years of unsuccessful business attempts. Then, Rebecca took the stand to testify on her own behalf.
This is where things got really interesting. Under oath, Rebecca repeated all the cruel things she'd been saying about me for years. She talked about how embarrassed she was by my career, how frustrated she'd been by our financial limitations, how she'd felt trapped in a marriage to someone she described as unmotivated and unrealistic about his prospects. But here's the kicker. Rebecca's lawyer had her testify about our lifestyle during the marriage, trying to prove that she'd been supporting me. She described our apartment, our cars, our vacations, our dining out, all the comfortable aspects of our life together. What she didn't realize was that she was actually providing evidence of how well I'd been able to provide for her, even while maintaining my cover as a struggling freelancer. When Catherine cross-examined Rebecca, she was surgical in her questioning. She got Rebecca to admit that we'd never actually struggled financially, despite my supposedly inadequate income. She got Rebecca to acknowledge that I'd always been able to contribute to our household expenses. And most importantly, she got Rebecca to confirm under oath that she was leaving me for Marcus because he was wealthier and more successful. "Mrs. Mitchell," Catherine said, "is it fair to say that you're seeking this divorce primarily because you believe your husband lacks the financial means to provide the lifestyle you desire?" "Well, that's not the only reason," Rebecca replied. "But yes, financial security is important to me." "And you found that financial security with Mr. Marcus Thompson, your boss, with whom you've been having an affair for the past 8 months?" Rebecca's face went red, but she couldn't lie under oath. "Yes." "So you're leaving your husband, whom you consider financially unsuccessful, for a man whom you consider financially successful?" "I suppose that's one way to put it." Catherine smiled. "No further questions, Your Honor." Then it was our turn. Catherine stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that will substantially change the nature of these proceedings." She started with the recordings I'd made of Rebecca's verbal abuse. The judge listened to my wife calling me a loser, a failure, an embarrassment. He heard her comparing me to other men and finding me lacking. He listened to her telling me I was a disappointment and that she regretted marrying me. Rebecca looked shocked. She had no idea I'd been recording her cruel behavior, and hearing it played back in court in front of a judge and court reporter clearly made her realize how awful she sounded. But Catherine was just getting started. "Your Honor," she said, "Mrs. Mitchell has based her entire case on the premise that her husband is financially unsuccessful and has failed to provide adequately for their marriage. I'd like to present evidence that this premise is completely false." That's when Catherine started revealing my real financial situation. She showed the court my investment account statements, $47 million in various portfolios. She presented documentation of my business interests, my real estate holdings, and my cryptocurrency investments. She demonstrated that during our entire marriage, I had been worth more money than Rebecca had ever imagined possible. The courtroom went dead silent. Rebecca's face went through about 5 different emotions in the span of 10 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, shock, realization, and then something that looked like panic. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Catherine continued, "I'd like to present evidence that Mr. Mitchell has been secretly supporting the couple's comfortable lifestyle throughout their marriage, paying for expenses that his wife believed were being covered by her salary alone.
She showed bank records proving that I had been quietly paying the majority of our living expenses, allowing Rebecca to spend her entire salary on personal items, while believing she was the primary financial contributor to our household. But Catherine wasn't done yet. Your Honor, I also have evidence that Mrs. Mitchell has been planning to leave her marriage specifically to pursue a relationship with a wealthier man, believing that her husband's poverty made him an unsuitable partner. She presented text messages between Rebecca and Marcus, messages that Rebecca's lawyer had been required to turn over during discovery, but probably hadn't read carefully. In these messages, Rebecca complained about being stuck with a poor husband and talked about how excited she was to finally be with someone who could provide the lifestyle she deserved. The judge looked at Rebecca with an expression of complete disgust. "Mrs. Mitchell, did you know about your husband's financial situation during your marriage?" Rebecca was clearly struggling to process what she'd just learned. "No, Your Honor. I had no idea." "And you're testifying under oath that you decided to pursue divorce primarily because you believed your husband was financially unsuccessful?" Yes, that was part of it." "And you began an extramarital affair with another man who you believed was wealthier than your husband?" Rebecca looked like she wanted to disappear. "Yes, Your Honor."
The judge turned to Catherine. "Counselor, what is your client seeking in this divorce?" Catherine's response was perfect. "Your Honor, Mr. Mitchell is seeking a divorce on the grounds of adultery and emotional cruelty. Given that Mrs. Mitchell has abandoned the marriage for financial reasons based on false assumptions, and given her documented pattern of emotional abuse toward my client, we're asking that she receive nothing in the settlement. Mr. Mitchell's premarital assets should remain solely his property, and we're requesting that Mrs. Mitchell be responsible for her own legal fees." I wish you could have seen Rebecca's face at that moment. The woman who had spent years mocking me for being poor, who had left me for a wealthier man, who had demanded a substantial settlement from assets she thought didn't exist, suddenly realized that she had just thrown away a $47 million fortune. But the story doesn't end there. Rebecca's lawyer asked for a recess to consult with his client. During the break, I watched through the courthouse window as Rebecca had what appeared to be a complete meltdown in the parking lot. She was screaming at her lawyer, crying, and at one point she actually fell to her knees dramatically. Marcus, her wealthy boyfriend, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. When we reconvened, Rebecca's lawyer stood up and said, "Your Honor, my client would like to request that the divorce petition be withdrawn. She wishes to reconcile with her husband and continue the marriage." I actually laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. This woman had spent years telling me I was worthless, had cheated on me, had humiliated me in public, and now that she knew I was rich, she suddenly wanted to save our marriage? Catherine was ready for this. "Your Honor, my client does not wish to reconcile. Mrs. Mitchell abandoned this marriage when she believed her husband was poor. Her sudden desire to reconcile now that she's learned of his wealth only confirms that her feelings are based on financial considerations rather than love or commitment." The judge agreed. "Mrs. Mitchell, you can't unring this bell. You filed for divorce, you've admitted to adultery, and you've testified under oath about your reasons for leaving your husband. The court will proceed with the divorce as requested." The final ruling was everything Catherine and I had hoped for. Rebecca received nothing. $0, 0 cents. The judge ruled that her adultery and abandonment of the marriage for financial reasons voided any claim she might have had to marital assets. She was even ordered to pay her own legal fees, which I later learned amounted to almost $30,000.
But the real kicker came after the judge's ruling. As we were leaving the courthouse, Rebecca tried to approach me. She was crying, apologizing, begging me to give her another chance. She said she'd made a terrible mistake, that she really did love me, that money didn't matter to her after all. I looked at this woman who had made my life hell for years, who had cheated on me, who had told me repeatedly that I was a failure and a disappointment. And I said the words I'd been waiting 5 years to say. Rebecca, you were right about one thing. You do deserve better than me. You deserve exactly what you're getting. Nothing. The aftermath of the divorce was fascinating to watch. Rebecca's relationship with Marcus fell apart almost immediately. Apparently, when he realized that she just walked away from a fortune and was now essentially broke, his interest in her diminished significantly. I heard through mutual friends that she'd been expecting him to comfort her and possibly even help her financially after the divorce, but instead he broke up with her within a month. She tried to contest the divorce settlement, of course, but her case was hopeless. She had already testified under oath about her motivations, and there was no taking back her admission of adultery. Her new lawyer told her she didn't have a leg to stand on. Rebecca also tried reaching out to me multiple times in the months following our divorce. She sent letters, emails, text messages, all variations on the same theme. She was sorry, she'd made a mistake, she wanted another chance. Some of the messages were apologetic, others were angry, and a few were downright desperate. I saved them all, partly for legal protection, and partly because they served as a reminder of the bullet I'd dodged. The most pathetic attempt at reconciliation came about 6 months after our divorce was finalized. Rebecca showed up at what she thought was my apartment, not realizing that I'd moved out the day after our court hearing and bought a beautiful house in the hills overlooking the city. She ended up sobbing on the doorstep of my old place while my former neighbor called the police, thinking she was having some kind of mental health crisis. Meanwhile, I was finally free to live my real life. I bought my dream house, started traveling the world, and began openly enjoying the wealth I'd hidden for so many years. It was liberating beyond belief to not have to pretend to struggle financially. I could finally be myself completely, without maintaining this exhausting charade.
But you know what the most satisfying part was? It wasn't the money or the house or the freedom. It was the knowledge that I'd discovered Rebecca's true character before it was too late. Yes, it took 5 years and a lot of emotional pain, but I'd learned exactly who she was when she thought I had nothing to offer except myself. And who she was, it turned out, was someone who would abandon love for money without a second thought. Now, let me ask you one final question. Do you think I was wrong to test Rebecca the way I did? Should I have been honest about my wealth from the beginning and trusted her to love me anyway? Or do you think what I did was justified, given how she treated me when she thought I was poor? I've thought about this a lot in the years since our divorce, and I've come to believe that my deception, while extreme, revealed a fundamental truth about Rebecca's character that might have taken much longer to discover otherwise. A person who truly loves you will support you through financial struggles, not abandon you because of them. Rebecca failed that test spectacularly, and in the end, she got exactly what she deserved. The irony is that if Rebecca had been the woman I thought I was marrying, if she'd continued to love and support me regardless of our supposed financial struggles, I would have eventually told her the truth and we could have enjoyed that wealth together. Instead, her greed and cruelty cost her everything. I'm remarried now, by the way, to a wonderful woman named Amanda who knew about my financial situation from our very first date. I decided I was done with tests and games. Amanda loves me for who I am, not what I have, but she also enjoys the comfortable life we can afford together. We travel, we're generous with charity, and we're building a real partnership based on honesty and mutual respect. It's everything my marriage to Rebecca should have been, but never could be because Rebecca was incapable of loving someone she considered beneath her financially. Sometimes I wonder what Rebecca's doing now. I heard she moved back in with her parents for a while after Marcus dumped her. I know she eventually found another job, though not one as good as the position she'd had before all this drama affected her professional reputation. I hope she learned something from the experience, though I suspect she probably just tells herself that I'm the villain in this story.
But here's the thing. I sleep well at night, knowing that I gave Rebecca every opportunity to show me who she really was. I endured years of emotional abuse, gave her chance after chance to remember what love actually means, and only revealed my true financial situation when she was already planning to leave me for someone richer. Her reaction to learning about my wealth just confirmed everything I'd learned about her character during our marriage. The woman who had called me a loser, a failure, an embarrassment, who had cheated on me and planned to divorce me because she thought I was poor, suddenly wanted to reconcile the moment she learned I was worth $47 million. That tells you everything you need to know about what our marriage really meant to her. So, to answer the question I started with, what did Rebecca do when she learned I was a millionaire? She panicked, she cried, she begged, she tried to take back everything she'd said and done. But it was too late. She'd already shown me exactly who she was, and who she was turned out to be someone who valued money more than love, status more than commitment, and wealth more than the man who had loved her enough to marry her. In the end, Rebecca got exactly what she'd asked for throughout our marriage, to be free of her disappointing, unsuccessful husband. The only difference was that she finally learned what she'd really been walking away from. And by then, of course, it was far too late to matter. Justice, as they say, is sometimes served cold, but in this case, it was absolutely delicious.